Okay. Yeah, I was born in Vadodara, but spent only the first 2 years of my life there. So actually, obviously, don't remember anything from that time. The family shifted to Delhi. This would be 1963, I think. I was born in 61. And it shifted because my father, who was political scientist, decided to shift from Vadodara University where he was teaching to actually set up an institution in Delhi. Um, so he set up something called the Center for Study of Developing Societies, and so most of my all of my childhood actually, except for 1 year when I was in the US when I was 7 years old, all of my childhood has been in Delhi. Um, I think, I mean, there's a number of things which there's lots of things that I remember from the childhood, of course, but in terms of connecting to what I'm doing now, I think there were probably some of the major influences were the school itself, because it was in those days it was a very different kind of school. It focused quite a lot on extracurricular stuff, on sort of social economic sort of things, and not just the pure um, teaching and curriculum and the studying part of it. And even the studying and teaching was not necessarily only oriented towards the exams. So I think that, and then the fact that at home there was this atmosphere of partly academics, partly activism, but that both my father and my mother was, I mean, of course, she was mostly a housewife, but she also did things like mobile creches, working with kids in the mobile creches, in the early years of mobile creches in Delhi. Was a Montessori trained Montessori teacher, and so on. So there was that whole atmosphere in at home also of um, looking at social ecological, not so much ecological then, but sort of social developmental sorts of issues, poverty and stuff like that. Um, so that's in terms of the early childhood. There was also a lot of other influences. So, for instance, when I was 7 years old, for one whole year, we were in the US when Papa was at Stanford, in California, writing his first book. So I think the experience of a very different kind of a culture and life was also there. Learning English, um, growing up in a society which, at least materially and in many other ways, very very different. So coming back and trying to reconnect with India, understanding that things are not just smooth and easy and comfort zone and things like that. And because of the fact that parents were involved in this way, I was getting exposed at least to some of the other side of India. So, for instance, mummy would occasionally take us to the mobile creches, and so just knowing and learning and working and playing with street kids, street children, or Papa would talk about some of the issues he was dealing with, poverty and politics and things like that. And consciously, I mean, one thing I do remember very clearly is that neither of my parents actually, I can't remember them sort of preaching about any of these things or telling us that you have to do this or you have to be conscious of this, etc. It just happened because of the way they were and the work they were doing. So I guess that's been an influence, very very strong influence. Um, Environment itself, interestingly enough, I had almost no interest till high school, except for the fact that I loved animals. So I've always have loved animals, and somewhere towards sort of I think 9, 10 standard, got a little bit into animal rights issues. So that's the only sort of connection I had. But I had really, in fact, I remember distinctly that when people talked about pollution and things like that, I really thought, "Okay, not important, not relevant." It's only I think 10th, 11th standards onward, 11th especially, that first in the with the sort of the love of animals and the animal rights kind of thing. A few things really hit home. One is there was at that time export of monkeys from India to the US and for experimentation purposes. And I still distinctly remember reading an article in Illustrated Weekly of India on monkey experimentation, and some of the photographs that they had in that was, so I don't know, I guess something just touched me. I said, this is just wrong. We have to do something about this. I want to do something about this. That was one. And then a nature club had been started in school by a senior of mine. So I got involved with that, uh, primarily because I knew that the nature club was doing outings, and I said, "Chalo, it'll be fun to actually do outings." But in the process, of course, my mind began to get more open to issues of environment. So I think these two things: the first outing to Bharatpur, which was an eye opener for me, just seeing such an incredible diversity of birds, struggling with the names, you know, and uh, I mean, just learning a little bit about protected areas and wildlife conservation. So those sorts of issues. So I think those were the early sort of breaks in my life from otherwise what I was doing into trying to think of environment as being something that I want to get involved in. So around 11th or 12th standard itself, we actually got into an activist mode, which was that we actually went and met the then Prime Minister Morarji Desai. He had already imposed a ban on the export of monkeys, but there were some rumors that he would open it up again because the US was putting a lot of pressure to reopen it. So we actually went and met him and said that we support the ban and please don't lift it. um, I still remember his first question to us was, "Are you all vegetarians?" Fortunately, three of us were. And in fact, that's another interesting thing, because in the US, I had actually taken to my family. My mother was strict vegetarian. We are Jains, so she was a strict Jain vegetarian. Father and both brothers were eating meat, uh, despite my mother's displeasure. But I took to her side, so I never did. Then, for a very brief period in the US, I actually switched to eating meat, and I liked it. But then, getting back into, I mean, not getting back, getting into this interest on animal rights and then environment and things like that, I actually switched back to vegetarianism. So fortunately, when he asked this question, I could say I am vegetarian. Three of us were, so the three of us answered saying yes, we are. So he was happy. But anyway, so that, and then there was also an incident of princes from Saudi Arabia coming to hunt a threatened species of bird, the great Indian bustard, in Rajasthan. And they were given permission, though it was prohibited, but they were given permission because the Indian government was interested in Saudi Arabian oil, trying to get it cheaper or whatever, and something like that. So we were extremely upset about this, and we did a little demonstration outside the Saudi Arabian embassy. Just, I think there must have been about 15 of us, school kids and some adults. And I think that I still remember one placard from that time which we'd put up saying, "Eat custard, not bustard." So I still have those photographs. Anyway, so this was it was interesting because in school normally it was frowned upon to be doing these sorts of activist things, but because Sardar Patel was a little different, they were sort of tolerant to it, and a couple of the teachers even encouraged it. So I think that those were my early exposures to that. Then we would go a lot to the Delhi Ridge Forest for nature walks and field biology classes and bird watching and so on. And we saw a lot of destruction taking place. So that then was our next kind of big attempt to try and stop that destruction for road widening and garbage dumps and construction and so on. And what we did then was we actually, our nature club combined with a whole lot of other nature clubs or other schools and did a demonstration. This would be 1979. So I would be just about in 12th, moving out of 12th class. And that demonstration is when then it, the need for an organization that could take up these things more regularly came up. And that's when Kalpuriksh was formed, so in 79, just around the time I was finishing 12th standard. So anyway, that's but around that same time, actually, we had also started producing a newsletter called Nature, just Nature. It used to be called Call of the Wild, and then it became Nature. And that was again produced. If you remember, in those days, there was the cyclostyling uh, technology. So it was all sort of hand composed and then cyclostyled, and 100 copies produced and distributed in schools and all that. So these were things, activities that were already happening, but because it was happening rather sporadically and informally, the what the Ridge protest did was to indicate to us clearly the need for something which was a bit more regular, because we also felt at that time there were also a couple of seminars, I remember at that time, on Delhi's environment, where we had gone and raised our voice, and it was very clear to us that our seniors, as in the decision makers or even some of the senior NGO people, are not really doing very much. They were talking about it, but we felt very impatient. So that something had to be done, actively done to protect the environment. So that's why the need to form a group. Now, of course, at those days, none of us really knew what it meant to form an organization. So it's interesting that for the first several years, it never registered. Kalpavriksha actually, in fact, we didn't even have the name Kalpavriksha till 1980, if I remember correctly. So at least 1 year it took us to even think of a name, 80 or 81. And basically, what we did was to make sure that we met very regularly and took up issues as we thought they were important. So the Ridge forest issue became a consistent campaign, because to our surprise, that first big demonstration that we had, where we had about 300 people and walked to the Lieutenant Governor's office and gave him a memorandum, it actually had a huge impact. The media loved it. They covered it widely. Lieutenant Governor called us in twice to say, okay, what do you think we should do? And in 1980 itself, in fact, the Ridge Forest was declared a protected, it was given a legal status. So we realized that even small actions could actually have a significant impact. So as and when issues came up, like Indraprasth Power Station pollution, or Badarpur Power Station had this huge problem of polluting and making the lives of the neighboring villages miserable. I mean, of course, apart from the chimney pollution, there was a huge amount of dust that was actually coal dust that was falling into the neighboring villages, and we'd heard about it. So we went and did an investigation, helped the villagers to petition the authorities. In 80 and 81, we had started hearing about, and had been a little bit in touch or heard of the Chipko movement, attended a couple of lectures by Sundalalji and so on. So we thought, let's go there and see. So during our vacations, we used our vacations to the maximum possible. During our vacations, we then went up and trekked through for 15-20 days through some of the Chipko areas with the Chipko activists. So that really broadened our horizons on what environment is not just an issue of saving monkeys and trees in Delhi, but it's a much wider, and it's a development issue, it's a social issue, it's an economic issue. So that's basically how the organization was formed and formalized. I passed out of school 79, joined college, and we then also set up in Hindu college in Delhi University, also set up a nature club there. And the Hindu College Nature Club, along with 2 or 3 other that were also set up by contemporaries, Miranda and so on, that became a very active forum, especially of discussion amongst the students, and calling in people like Sundarlal Bogana or Ramchandra Guha or Madhav Gadgil, etc., to come and speak to the students. The National Fish Workers Forum was also invited. So in the university, we kind of got things going. Quite a lot of students got involved with that. The organization itself struggled a bit because there were actually very few NGOs working on environment in those days. I can think of hardly any. Most of the prominent NGOs that are working today started around that time. Development Alternatives, CAC started, I think, a year after us. Priya. So everybody was kind of just trying to figure out how these things should work. We also we had seen some other organizations like WWF, for instance, which were very large and didn't quite want to go that direction for various reasons. So we decided we're going to stay small and relatively informal. I'm not quite sure how, but I think the sort of people who were involved, because we were all in some sense contemporaries, there wasn't any one single figure who was, dominating or charismatic or whatever. We also tended towards a structure in which everybody is involved in decisions. And then over 2, 3, 4 years, we decided that let's keep that structure. Consciously actually keep a structure in which all members are involved in all decisions. That's still the case. So those are the early years, and I think the Chipko trip. Then in 1983 we did the Narmada trek. So we'll come to that later. Yeah, but so I think those first 2, 3 years of being involved in activism in Delhi, getting to learn much more about Delhi's problems, and then the Chipko. And also 82, I think it was. 1982 is when there was this incident of firing on villagers in Bharatpur. Because Bharatpur was one of our favorite hunting grounds, so to speak, it shocked us that there could be an incident like that where, first of all, that villagers, we knew that there was grazing inside, but it wasn't something that was part of our consciousness. For us, Bharatpur was birds and incredible bird habitat. But the fact that people were dependent on it for an economic livelihood, and also then that overnight a government could take a decision saying, okay, no more grazing inside, and then when people try to come in, they're shot upon, and 7 villagers were killed. So we actually immediately sent a investigation team to investigate, and they found that it was a completely uncalled for, unnecessary act of aggression by the government, and no alternatives had been provided for the grazing, etc. So we did a report. But what was very interesting in that was that there was a huge internal debate within Kalpavriksha itself on there were some who felt that the killing was obviously nobody would obviously justify that, but the stoppage of grazing was justified because it would affect the birds. There were others who felt that no, human beings also have a role, have a stake in the area, and they should be allowed. So there was this massive debate, and in fact, that plus a couple of other things actually even created a split within the group. And some people, the folks who were more into hardcore wildlife conservation, they actually walked out at that point. Anyway, that happened, and then I think the Chipko, Bharatpur, and then the Delhi experiences. These were the sort of main early influences, and the Badarpur power station thing, where we realized that poor people living around a facility that's providing rich people with, something that the rich people want or need, are not necessarily beneficiaries of the same thing, and in fact can be the ones who lose out on it. And just being able to get involved with the lives of those villagers was also something. All these things, I think, were huge influences early.
Moving on, to your education, and then of course the issues of dams. When did they get, not just the Narmada, but how did they become a priority issue? And then the Narmada journey, how did it take place? What happened?
Can you also just add that? No, if you can just also mention that when you went to college, then what you were doing in college, was it sort of connected to all these interests, or was your college education and the subjects you chose there something different?
Yeah, I think that's the college part is a really interesting one. I've also been trying to figure out whether exactly the same question. If you looked at the formal part of what we did in college, I did sociology, both in bachelor's and master's. I didn't find the subject matter, the subject matter as it was in the textbooks and the teaching itself particularly interesting. and very little connection to my increasing interest in environment. But I think what it did do was that it, again, it gave me a fairly solid basis for understanding Indian society. So before that, I mean, we knew there was something like caste, but trying to understand what it meant, we knew that there were inequalities, we knew that there were political issues and so on. But actually getting some amount of understanding of those, and then the informal discussions we would have amongst ourselves with the students and some of the teachers who were interested in going beyond the classroom into discussing these things with us. I think that in some way, maybe subconsciously, more than consciously, has helped to me in the subsequent years in even being able to understand environmental issues a little bit more widely than I probably otherwise would have. But otherwise, there was really no connection. In fact, when I finished my master's and my teachers heard that I was not continuing with, I mean, I got reasonably good marks, so they were all hoping that I would do an MPhil and a PhD and whatever, become an academic. And when I said, no, I'm not interested, they were very disappointed. But by then, I'd already decided that I was going to get into environment full time. I didn't want to do academics, at least not sociology. So anyway, so yes, there is some influence, but I don't think it was a very direct or conscious kind of thing. With sorry, Nandini, you had said the dams, yeah.
The whole journey towards.
Yeah. So in the early 80s, when we these Chipko treks, we had also got involved with doing a few lectures, as I said, in Hindu College and university in general. And so these other sorts of issues of development versus environment were coming in constantly. I don't remember, I really don't recall when the issue of dams first hit home, but I think the issue of the Narmada dams actually came in 1982, if my memory is correct. When a colleague of mine, Rajiv Bhartari, actually introduced, he was from Madhya Pradesh, and he knew the river, as part of his childhood. He had grown up along the river, and he had said that, look, there's this whole series of dams coming up, and is this something that as a college, as a nature club, and he was already involved with the Hindu College Nature Club, as a nature club and as Kalpavriksha, we should at least try and understand. I think that was also around the time when the issue of dams was becoming quite a big international thing. Edward Goldsmith had started doing some work on this. I think he started putting together his volumes, finally came out with 3 volumes on dams. So we knew about some of the work that was happening there. We'd heard a little bit about some of the controversies with regard to big dams in Brazil. And then the Central Indian controversy, the Bhopal-Patna, Michapalli, those things. So this was just news that was kind of coming to us, and we knew there was some connection somewhere because anyway we were getting interested in environment development issues. So when Rajiv brought this up, we said, well, this is an interesting thing. Maybe the Nature Club should do something, at least to try and go and see what there is. We may not want to do anything actively, but at least try and understand. So that's why in late 82, early 83, we started actually making plans to go to the valley. Again, all these things had to be done during vacation only. You could not otherwise do it as you're studying. So what we decided was that let the Nature Club actually formulate a proposal for an adventure trek along the Narmada. Yeah. And that way we could actually justify even trying to get a little bit of funds. I think, I remember that the first funding we got for this was from the Ministry of Sports. They had a promotion of adventure scheme in which they would give 15 rupees per person per day for any kind of adventure thing. So we said we're going to do a trek along the river, and they actually got the funds for, I think, 10 people or something. Fortunately, also some of the other people involved in either the Hindu College Club or some of the others, other clubs, they knew a couple of officials in the Madhya Pradesh government, and we knew some work that had happened by Surat, this Center for Social Studies, Ghanshyam Bhai, and so on, and of course the Archvahini work that was happening there. We'd also read a little bit about what the Harsud campaign had taken. Not Harsud, yeah, it was Harsud, wasn't it? I think it was Narmada Sagar. Trying to remember, was it one of the other dams? When maybe Tawa, yes, of course, Tawa, the controversies with regard to the waterlogging and things like that. But I seem to remember that there was another movement on displacement other than what Archvahini was doing. There was something in Madhya Pradesh also at that time. But I mean, I'll have to go back into.
Then it could be Narmada Ghati Nirman Samiti, which was started by few people, including Kashinathji Trivedi and some others from Nimad. Do you recall any of that?
That's right. Yeah, but
if you recall.
Yeah, no, that's it. The Nirman Samiti, and Om Prakash Rawal's name is very distinct. I think there was also a meeting in Gandhi Peace Foundation which we had been involved in which Chipko people, and I think Om Prakash ji had also come for that. Arch Vahini, I think Amrish Bhai or anyway, one of them was there. So that's also when I think we started hearing some of these issues around Narmada. Anyway, so we formulated this proposal, and 8-10 people got interested, and we decided we wanted to actually try and see if we could walk the entire valley. Not everybody, but in batches. So that's how it started. So it was actually a joint Hindu College Nature Club Kalpavriksh activity that was formulated, and 83 summer vacations is when we did the trip. We had also learnt a little bit about the whole parikrama tradition there. And so one idea was also that, okay, let's think of this as a bit of a parikrama, but only half. I mean, not the full round, but halfway. So it was a mix of I mean, some people were really interested in the adventure part. Some people were interested in the just the nature and wildlife and all that. Some people were interested in the dams. So this group of 6-7 people started at Bharuch. We were joined by Kashyap Mankodi from Center for Social Studies at that time. And Archvahini people also helped us at that point. They were not part of the trek initially, but they met us as we got to Mangrove and so on. So that's how it started, and it was a 50 odd day trip. I didn't do the full trip, but a couple of other colleagues like Rajiv, who had initiated it, and others, they did the full trek. And we got from there to it wasn't walking all the way. There were some portions which were done by bus or boat, but we did all the way from Bharuch to Amarkantak. So that was an incredible experience. It was it's probably for me the Chipko treks, and then this probably the two most influential for me things that really opened up my mind and brought a whole lot of different issues and complexities to me. Most memorable sort of things. So that's how it started. When we got back from there were lots of issues that were coming up along the way, new issues that were getting added that we had never earlier thought of. We actually consciously tried to meet with some of the movement people, including Nirman Samiti, Archvahini, etc., and also a lot of officials, but primarily just speak to people along the way. Just what do they think of these dams? We made it a point to visit a number of the prominent places like Omkareshwar and Maheshwar and of course Amarkantak itself, the dam sites, the Sardar Sarovar dam site and the Narmada Sagar dam site. We went to the Tawa area. We actually took a detour and went to the Tawa dam, spoke to the people who were active on the Tawa issue, the waterlogging issue especially. I think Anupam Mishra had also been involved with the Tawa thing at that point, so he had also given us some interesting contacts and information. I'm actually, yesterday I tried hunting out my diary from that trek. I haven't found it yet, but when I do, I'm sure there'll be a lot more memories that will come back. So then when we got back, it was actually very confusing for us, because there was just so much to absorb, and then because we'd spoken to a whole variety of people, for us it was like everything from extremely strong support for the dam to extremely strong opposition to the dam. The whole range of opinions and experiences were there, for experiences also of previous dams like Tawa. Bargi was, I think, coming up at that point. It was half constructed at that point. So all these experiences were with us, and we didn't quite know what to do with it. But we did know that we wanted to produce something out of it, and not just leave it as an experience. So that's when we actually, a couple of us, Rajiv and I, took on the responsibility of doing a report. And eventually 7-8 people joined into that. And we also had a problem in the sense we couldn't find any previous similar kind of report from India of asking basic questions about a dam or a river valley project. So the closest we could, I think, come to, if I remember, was something like Tawa, but it was a specific thing on waterlogging, or a few things of displacement from the past, which were not properly dealt with. But we couldn't find any report which took a overall perspective on ecological, social, economic, political kind of angles. So it wasn't easy. But anyway, we did over a process of a few months, we did a report, 50-page report, which finally then was brought out as a Kalpvriksh and Hindu College Nature Club report and released to the press, and a shorter version went into Economic and Political Weekly, and also into The Ecologist that Goldsmith was producing, and then into his book, his volume on dams in across the world. And so that was 84. The reports coming out and then being published, 84, 85. Again, 84, when this was produced and released to the press, there was a lot of interest. And then, of course, around the same time, much more activity had started in the valley, wasn't it? I think 84, 85, and a lot of was it 84? Yeah, 84, we did a follow-up trip, not to the whole valley, but to Amarkantak. Because when we had got to Amarkantak, we could only spend, I think, 3-4 days there. We realized that there were huge issues there itself. So the mining, there were two massive mines, Balco and Nalco, if I remember correctly, aluminum companies. And people had spoken to us about the fact that since this is the origin of Narmada, Son, and anyway, 3 rivers, that the fact that there was mining there is going to significantly impact these rivers, and of course forests and so on. So we did again, we put together, by that time I was in Delhi School of Economics. So Delhi School of Economics, Hindu College and Kalpvriksh put together a team to do a 1-month study in Amarkantak. This was 84. So that was again a very interesting experience. So that's the early years. And then when movement started in Narmada, it was a very natural thing for us to actually get involved with the movement, provide whatever we had in terms of environmental understanding. Some of us, like Rahul, got interested in looking at the cost-benefit issues. Vijay Paranjpe at that point, so we in fact invited him also for a lecture, I think, in Delhi University, to talk on the economic aspects of the dams. So that's the early years. Got involved very much into the movement centrally.
Actually getting involved more as part of the movement. Before that, I have a few questions on already what you have said so far. One is, you talked that in the initial years, while you planned this trip, you came in touch with CSS, Arch Vahini, Narmada Ghati Navnirman Samiti. you also talked about several issues came up, or should I go just one by one? I just wanted to know what your impressions and what the stands of these organizations were at that point of time. You did mention that right from pro dam to anti dam. But particularly if you can focus on CSS, Archvahini, Narmada Ghati Nav Nirman Samiti, if you remember the Tawa people, how did they work? What were the issues? And important players, you said you met Om Prakash Rawalji. If you can talk a little bit more on this whole trip of 50 days, how long were you there? What happened with the interactions with all these groups?
Yeah, okay. This is all from memory, which is not very strong, unfortunately. My memory of events and people is not that great anymore. The Archvahini was a very interesting experience because our first interactions with them, the impression we got very strongly was that they were anti-dam. That they had the same basic questions about the dam, Sardar Sarovar, as subsequently the movement did. And in fact, I seem to remember that it was to us a little bit of a surprise when they subsequently seemed to be taking the stand that, well, the dam is coming up, and not that it's okay, but anyway, it's coming up, and that we need to focus on rehabilitation. But our impression really was that they were asking the same fundamental questions at that point. So that's our early impression. We were very impressed by the sincerity with which they were actually doing some of the work with the people who are going to be displaced or had already been displaced. With, well, I think it wasn't just it's hard work actually trying to work a better deal for people. As we all know, it's not easy to deal with, and those are days when there was no other pressure also. It's not like there is a global attention to a project, and so there's a lot of pressure from above and all that. It's basically just what the grassroots is doing. And so to us it seemed as if the way they were involved with the ousties was it was good work, insofar as the limited issue of resettlement, displacement and resettlement was concerned. And because they were also asking the same fundamental questions, we didn't really have. It's only subsequently that we actually started also developing differences, because then that fundamental questioning of the dam itself took a backseat in what they were doing, and we didn't think that was fully justified. So that was with Archvahini. We stayed for 2-3 days in Mangrol with them. A little part of the trek was with their activists. The CSS bit, we started, I think the very first thing we did was we landed in Surat and had a half a day or full day discussion with the CSS people on Narmada. Kashyap and Ghanshyam Bhai and so on. And to us, it was very informative, because obviously since they were already doing a little bit of work on it, they had much more information on it. But they were not, it's an academic institution, they were not willing to actually stand up and say that, we don't think that these dams, they were willing to ask those questions in an academic discussion, but I don't think they were willing to actually become an activist kind of thing. Individually, some of them might be. So, for instance, Kashyap, when he agreed to come with us, obviously he was already exposing himself in that sense, but not as an institution. But it was useful for us, because they had, like I said, as an academic institution, they had information and they had some understanding of the dam and its issues, and also broader understanding of Gujarat and its politics and its dynamics, which was very important for us to understand the dam itself. So that's on that side. Then the Narmada Navnirman Samiti, Om Prakash ji and all, frankly, my memory is very poor on that front. But the distinct thing that I do remember is that it was primarily about some amount of fundamental thing about why do these dams need to be there anyway. But I think it was more about rehabilitation. The Tawa people was very interesting. I frankly don't remember any names, but the what it the fact that they were questioning the whole benefits part, because everybody till then had been talking about the negative impacts, displacement, etc. In fact, environment almost nobody was, but displacement especially. But here was a movement that was questioning the benefits, that in fact irrigation itself is not necessarily a great thing, which was new to us. And I think that's one of the reasons why Rahul and others actually got into looking at, okay, the benefits of Sardar Sarovar also, are they really, it's not just the negative impacts, but are the benefits also real? So that understanding, going to the Tawa command area where we actually met farmers who had been impacted by the waterlogging, going and seeing the dam, that's my main recollection from that trip, just looking at that. Then the soybean issue, the whole issue of the change in cropping patterns, not just waterlogging, but also the massive change in cropping patterns from the traditional or whatever patterns they had, much more diverse, into very heavy concentration on soybean, which is not locally useful. They have to sell it off. It has to be processed elsewhere, etc., etc. So those all those issues of cropping patterns and what irrigation does, large scale surface irrigation does to cropping patterns. These were the main. Trying to think of who else. Of course, we met a lot of officials, people in charge of, or senior engineers at the sites, Sardar Sarovar and Narmada Sagar. Also, I think Omkareshwar, yes. Who, frankly, there was nothing new in what they said. I mean, it was the usual stuff about, India needs irrigation, India needs power kind of stuff. So I don't think that we learned a lot, but it was still useful to be able to get that perspective. We spoke to a lot of Parikrama-vasis, and that was a very interesting perspective, because for them, it was impossible that anybody could actually block the river. So this whole cultural, spiritual perspective that, and then the whole stories of how at Sahastradhara, it was at Reva was at Reva as the river, there was the king attempted to stop her, and then she slipped through his fingers, and that's why Sahastradhara is 100 different streams. And so that it's impossible for any dam to block the river. That whole perspective was actually very strong when we spoke to especially the Parikrama people, and a number of ashrams and things along the way. And many of the villagers also actually had a very similar kind of a feeling. And that was also good, because whether one believed it or not, you come out of college where rational thinking, etc., then you're a little skeptical of these things. But to me especially, I think it was very important, because I remember distinctly bringing this issue up repeatedly, including with when I got into Indian Institute of Public Administration. We actually did one training session for Narmada officials on environmental issues. And one of the issues I brought up was that, doesn't anybody consider the fact that the river has its own life and may want to run free? Of course, everybody laughed. You can see a bunch of engineers trying to absorb something like that. But for me, that still remained a very important part of the whole opposition to something like that. So it's not just about the economics of it and the displacement and the forest submergence. All of that is important. But just this, I don't know how to call it, maybe spiritual, cultural, whatever, but just this thing of, a river is supposed to run free. And if Narmada wants to, then she should be allowed to. So that perspective came from speaking to a lot of just ordinary people, Parikrama people, etc. Let's see, who else? I think if I remember anything more, I'll mention it.
I have two questions so far what you have talked. One is, you said the report was out in 84 and had a big impact. Can you just say what kind of impact, on whom, where, how?
Yeah, again, it's going to be fragmentary. The report and its impact. There was media was quite positive. Well, I mean, the media gave us a lot of space. We did a press conference. We released the report. and we got some good coverage. 84, yes. One of the impacts I do remember of the report was, and the release of the report was, that the chairman of the Narmada Valley Development Authority, I think NVDA was already there at that point, Shukla? S.C. Verma? Was it S.C. Verma? I'll have to again look at notes, but I think whoever it was at that point actually called and asked for an appointment and came. This would be 85, I think, a few months after we released the report, 85, and came and met us to, argue out his position. It was a very interesting meeting, because obviously we didn't have common ground, but there were many things on which we did agree. For instance, he did say that yes, rehabilitation issues are serious and we haven't been able to deal with them properly. We need to do much better on that front. Packages have to be better, implementation, etc. But of course, fundamentals of the need for dams or not was disagreement. But you could see, I don't think ordinarily a small group or a bunch of young people releasing a report would actually evoke that kind of a thing. But I think probably because the media picked it up, and also we did the usual stuff of sending it off to all the officials concerned and so on. That helped. 85, I had also, once I finished masters, I also joined the IIPA, in Indian Institute of Public Administration. And at IIPA, both Shekhar Singh and I also took up these issues officially as IIPA staff or faculty. He was faculty, I was research. And that also kind of created a bit of a impact, because IIPA has its own influence in official bureaucratic circles. But anyway, so that was the thing. Also, what happened was that there was a lot more civil society interest that our report created. So many organizations and individuals actually then either called or wrote in or whatever and said, we'd like to be involved, or at least to get to know what's happening. I think it was also around so now the movement, the NBA part of it is a little bit hazy in my memory. Was it 84, 85? I think it was 85 that it really became kind of activated. Before which it was the Navnirman Samiti and Archvahini and so on. Setu, yes. CSS, Gandhi Peace Foundation to some extent. Who else was there? Mark, yes, of course, doing all the rehab studies. And we had helped to organize one or two NGO meetings on Narmada in Delhi, where many of these people kind of were present, which is one of the locations where the tensions and all of that came up. They were already there, but at these meetings, I think it was, for us, it became very clear that there wasn't adequate meeting ground amongst all the civil society actors that were raising the Narmada issue. There was not adequate meeting ground. I remember also that one of my dominant impressions from that time was that it wasn't just about issues, but also about personalities, which is, I guess, often or always the case in with NGOs in India or maybe everywhere. But it was about some very strong personalities with differing opinions. But to my mind, I still seem to remember that I think the differing opinions were not so fundamentally different, or it didn't seem to us to be so fundamentally different that they couldn't be resolved. But for the fact that these very strong personalities simply did not find a way of resolving them, to put it the most charitable way. So it's okay, Marg, Vasudha, then Medha, then the whole Archvahini gang, and all of these people were extremely strong individuals in their own right. And I think those of us who were trying to bring them together were not strong enough to. We were all really youngsters, and that we were not able to do that. it actually, one of the meetings we had organized, it became extremely volatile and almost actually even bitter. NBA itself, really, I don't remember very much of those early years of what the formation, I mean, or what how we were involved with that. But 85 onwards, I think, is when we got truly involved with the central part of the Andolan. Was it 85 or 86 when the Samanvay Samiti was formed? 86, I don't. Anyway, around that time when the sort of core coordination committee was formed for the NBA, and I got involved with that.